Good afternoon, everyone. So excited that you're joining me today. We are going to be talking about a subject that I love, and that is our hand look stitches, otherwise known as a Sashiko type of stitch. There's many different ways of using them. And as we wait for people to start coming on, I just want to warn everybody, make sure not to respond to any of the spam that's coming in there. There's all these people looking to create problems. So make sure there's no way we're going to be asking for you to click on anything. Don't click on any links. Don't respond to anybody who's asking you to do something that has, that's not here. We have Amy and Meredith here today that are going to help me keep everything organized, and I'll be able to see comments. If there's somebody asking how to do something, then they'll help me ask make sure we know what we're questions we have. All right, so we're going to go directly to it. And a hand look stitch, or a Sashiko type stitch, you can see right here, it changed actually. We've had this stitch for a number of years, but the newer stitch is actually dramatically different from our stitch that we had with our designer Essie and our diamonds and rubies. The newer machines have it programmed in differently. And so it was very challenging to go around corners with the older stitch, but the new stitch is really nice, and you get a very consistent look to it. And here's an example that I might have shown you before of going around in corners, and you can see in this case, I'm using a white top thread and I have pink in the bottom. So the thread you were seeing is the pink. On our newer machines, they recommend using a monofilament thread, but I personally take a little bit of a different approach to it. And I like to use a stronger color thread that matches the fabric that I'm using on top. So in this case, this just gives you an idea of some different options that you have. Here I have a turquoise thread color in the bottom, in the bobbin, and then on top I have a white color. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see that a little bit closer. So in this next option, I've actually made a two-tone stitch. I have the same turquoise color, but I have orange on top. And so you're seeing a turquoise and an orange and a turquoise and an orange. And then over next to that, I have a neon yellow color that looks like this. And you can see that kind of gives you an interesting look also. So when you zoom in, you can see it just gives you a little bit of a different effect. Now on the back, you still do get a look of the hand look stitch, but it's not as dramatic. It's kind of faded away. I have a black print on the back. And normally what I'll do is I'll match my thread color to the back, and so the stitch just disappears on the back. I have a couple of other examples for you to see. Let me get back out here. In this case, on the embroidery, after I did the embroidery, I quilted the background fabric, and then I felt like it needed a little definition. So I did the hand look stitch around the outside of the embroidery about 1/4 of an inch. And that turned out pretty good. I was happy with the way that worked. And then I have another example of this is done on denim. And the denim didn't have any batting to it. It's just one layer. But you can kind of see it gives it a pretty nice look. And it really does add a lot of definition to the stitch. Even over here on this denim, where you'll see the green, because the denim is two-tone, I was thinking it might not show up that well, but it really did give a really nice visual effect to the denim. So let's go over to our machine so you can see what that Sashiko stitch looks like. I'm going to come over here, and today I'm stitching on my my Epic 2. And let me just pull myself in here. And in my menu of stitches, all right, when I go to menu D, menu A is the first menu that comes on. If I scroll to menu D, stitch number 2, that is the hand look stitch. And you can see that it's written all in English. It says it imitates a hand quilted stitch, and the thread in the needle use invisible thread, and the bobbin with a cotton. Now, I've played around with a lot of combinations, And I'm not a big fan of the metallic thread. I like a thread that doesn't have the shine to it that a metallic thread has. So this stitch is a new programming that you'll find on the Designer Epic 2 and on all of our newer machines. That stitch has been reprogrammed. Afterwards, if you have an older machine, I'll show you how you can program it in so that you can get the same stitch, even though it may not be built in. So in this case, I have everything done. I'm ready to go. You'll notice that it shows me to use the P foot, which is the 1/4 inch foot that has the hole in the center. And it's showing that because I'm on the Epic 2, it's showing to use the IDF and some kind of stabilizer or batting to give some body to that stitch. And when I go to move it, and I'm going to, I'll start sewing in just a second, but I wanted to let you know, if you have any questions, if we have any questions to what we're doing, please let Amy and Meredith know, and then they'll write them down for me so that I can answer them as I'm going to go. Okay. So I'm going to switch over now to this camera so that you can see what I'm going to be stitching. And I might need to switch back and forth a little bit as I go, but let me see if I can get this down here a little bit closer to you. All right. So in this case, I have white fabric on the top and I have black fabric on the bottom. I've chosen a polyester sewing thread on the top that's white that matches my fabric, because a polyester thread is going to be much stronger than a rayon thread or a decorative thread. The trick that makes this work is the fact that you make sure that you're using the same color of thread as your fabric. All right. Now, if I was using a nylon thread, the invisible thread, it would work all right because you don't have to worry about changing the color, but you're going to see the shine of it. And on the different fabrics, that shine actually is more visible than using a color thread that matches your fabric. And so all I'm going to do to start is I'm using the stitch exactly the way it's programmed in, because I want you to see what you would do at home. I have a layer of batting and I have the back fabric on. And when I start sewing, now the trick of this stitch is what it's doing is it's sewing 5 or 6 short stitches, and then there's one long stitch. Let me see if I can zoom in. One long stitch, and the long stitch is the white thread that's on top. So the blue thread that you're seeing, that is the bobbin thread coming up from the top. There are adjustments that you can make that will help you see the bobbin thread more if you want to. And I'll switch over to my camera so you can see that. Now, just so you know, after we finish this topic, we're going to go into using the directional stitches, and they have a lot of possibilities for using a lot of new techniques. So make sure to stick around for the second part of this. Okay, back on my Designer Epic 2. When you look at the stitch position is in the center. The stitch length is 5.9. So if I touch my stop button, 5.9 just tells me that that distance is just a short little stitch. And then you're seeing the symbol for tension. If you want the bobbin thread to show more on the top surface, then you move that number up. And it does tell you in the owner's manual to do this. So all you're going to do is move it up a few notches, like the original was at 6. Now, most of you know that on a straight stitch, let's see if I go to a straight stitch, the regular tension is quite a bit lower, right? It's at 4.6. The reason this stitch works the way it does is because it is increasing the upper thread tension and it is pulling up the bobbin thread. I personally usually like to move it up to around 7 because I feel it gives it a little more consistent look. And as long as I'm using it under 7, I can use decorative threads like rayon threads. If I go up higher than 7, then I really need to use a stronger thread. And it could be a polyester embroidery thread or a regular sewing thread, but not a rayon thread. Okay. And then the last thing you're seeing here, that is your press-a-foot pressure. If I'm using a thicker batting, I will usually lighten up the press-a-foot pressure. But if it's just like a thin batting, like Warm and Natural or a fusible fleece, then I don't need to do that. But I just wanted to show you that button is right there for you to be able to use. Okay. So now I'm going to do that same stitch with the tension on 7. And then I'll come over and show you a comparison about what the two of them look like side to side. When I was doing these samples right here, I had the tension around 7. I think it was 7.2. And it really, what you're looking for is a very nice even look to your stitch. And over here, even with the yellow thread on the top or the orange, it's really nice and even, but it's not the look I'm going for. I want to have it look like a hand stitch. And so the one color design makes a lot of sense. Matching your top thread to your top fabric. And then in the bottom, you can choose what you want to do. I usually will match my bobbin thread, as I said, but here you can see it looks pretty nice. And I use the blue thread on there, but it still gives it a very nice look. Okay. So now that I've done the new tension, okay, and I'm ready to start going. Here, let me just get this up over here. And I want to make sure my bobbin is in there. You'll see the color of the bobbin. It's that turquoise color. All right. So it's a pretty bright color. I would not want to use a very light color in there because then it wouldn't show with the white color thread background. And let me explain that a little bit better. Let me just put this on here. So if I was doing this stitch on a black fabric, I might put white thread in the bobbin or a light yellow or that bright yellow, and it would show up really well. Because my fabric is pale and very light, then I'm going to use a darker, more extreme contrast in the bobbin. What I am seeing is the bobbin thread, and that's what I need to choose when I'm deciding on this stitch is what am I going to use for the bobbin thread. All right, I'm going to put on my trusty laser that I have on my Designer Epic 2, and then I can just do a consistent row of stitching like if I was hand stitching. Okay, so when you start sewing, you want to keep your speed even. You don't want to start off super fast and then slow down. Just keep it a nice even stitching, okay? You can go fast, but just keep your stitching consistent. I think you can see that it's a little bit brighter and a little bit more even than the original that I did with the tension on 6.0. Let me check to see if we have any questions before I go any farther. All righty, let's see. All right, so the number of the stitch. Well, these are really great questions. Let me go back to the beginning of the questions here, okay? All right, so the number of the stitch that you will find is going to be in your quilting menu. If you have one of the newer machines, like the, any of the Wi-Fi enabled machines, if you've got the Sapphire 85 or, the newer machines, you're going to find them in your D menu, which is your quilting menu. So the quilting menu, the first stitch is a 1/4 of an inch stitch with the A foot. It moves the needle over. Stitch number 2 is the hand look stitch. When you go to some of the older machines like the Diamond and the Ruby, the hand look stitch would be in the E menu. But remember, I said it's not programmed in the same way. So don't worry though. I'm going to make sure to tell you how to program it in so you can get that look. The foot that's recommended is the 1/4 of an inch foot, which is the P foot. And that's the foot that's got the hole just in the center. And that is a foot that comes with your machine for most people. Even if we go to looking at some of the older machines like the Opals And even the lilies. If you have programming, you can program in the stitch to get the exact same look as what I'm getting. You don't need a special foot with it. It is a quarter of a foot. There's a question about the Epic one. Has the Epic one, the original Epic, have the updated stitch? Yes, the Epic one was the very first machine that was made that had this new updated stitch. Okay, so you're going to find those stitches in the E menu, stitch number 2. We'll go back and I'm going to look at the machine, and then we're going to look back at some of our stitching too and talk about it again. And if anybody has any other questions. Now, let's look at our stitch. Your machine tells you everything you need to do, right? Right up there, it says that's the piece foot. It is the 1/4 of an inch foot. And over here in the instructions, it tells you how to do this. And if you don't have, a Wi-Fi enabled machine or an Epic 2, there in the app, it does give you all the instructions on how to use these stitches. Now, for those people who might like to decide you want to change the stitch, or you don't have this machine and you would like to program it in, all right, you'll see the stitches, how far apart they are. Right? If you would like there to be more bobbin thread showing so that the stitch length looks longer, then that might be another reason why you would want to program it in. And remember, everybody can program in this stitch, right? So this is something, if you have an opal, if you have a lily, you can go back 20 years, as long as you don't have a mechanical machine like an emerald, then everybody can program in this stitch. So I'm going to show you how to program it in and how that you can adjust the change of it. And then we'll stitch that out so you can see what that looks like. Okay. All right, here we go. So in our programming, to program in the stitch, and it's pretty much the same for any machine, the programming is down at the bottom on the Epic 2, where you see the A and the zigzag. On the older machines, it's going to say PROG, and that shows you that it's programming. So when I open that stitch up, I'm going to go to menu A, which is our basic menu of stitches, and I'm going to choose a straight stitch. The length of the straight stitch is 2.5, and I can see down at the bottom, it tells me 2.5. I'm going to shorten that stitch up to a very short stitch. All right. We are now at 0.5. So that means it's one very, very tiny stitch. And now the amount of times that I duplicate it are going to decide how long the stitch shows on the front. Remember the stitch that you're seeing on the front here? How long it will be will depend upon how many times I duplicate that stitch. So if I duplicate it 5 times, then it'll be like the stitch that I have stitched out that was built into the machine. Or I could decide I want to make it longer. And now the last thing I have to do is touch a straight stitch 1 time. And this time I'm going to lengthen the stitch to 4.0. And where that is showing, it is where there is no stitching. That is just a straight stitch, a big long straight stitch. And so now I have programmed in that stitch. It didn't take too long, right? Some short stitches and 1 long stitch. Now, the only other thing I need to do for this to work is to change the tension. If I left the tension like this, the stitch would be balanced and I'm not going to see the bobbin thread the way that I want it to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the bobbin tension about where it was when I programmed in that stitch. And remember, I usually like somewhere between 6.8, 7.0, 7.2. And every machine's a little bit different. So it's important that you are going to test this stitch with your machine. So now that I've done that, I'll come in and I will stitch it next to the one that was programmed in on my Epic 2. So you can see a direct correlation of how it works. Okay. So my needle is stitching right here. I'm using my laser to kind of keep me straight. So I have a nice looking stitch. And all I have to do is put my foot on the pedal and start sewing. So you tell me, is it as good as the original? I think it turned out pretty good, don't you? You'll see it's a little bit longer. And in some ways, I like it better than the original because the stitch on top is a little bit longer. And so it kind of elongates everything. This was the original here. And this is the one that I just programmed in. So what do you think? That was pretty easy, wasn't it? Let's see if there was any questions. No other questions. Let me just double check here. All righty. So I want to make sure that everybody understands you do not need a special machine to program in that stitch. The nice thing about the newer machines, like the Brilliance 80 and the Sapphire 85 and the Epic 95Q, the newer machines have it programmed in already. But if you don't have it programmed in, as long as you have programming, you can program in that stitch. It took just a couple of minutes. Okay. So it really, I don't think it took me longer than 30 seconds to program that stitch. So a Topaz 40 does not have the stitch programmed in like that, but you can do it because you have programming. It's not on your machine exactly that way, but you can program. And the nice thing about this video is you can go back and watch it, right? When you go into programming, all you're doing is you're putting in 5 or 6 short stitches and 1 long stitch. And then you touch OK and you're ready to stitch it out. And if you're smart, you'll save it and then you don't have to reprogram it in that way. Okay. So if you don't want the thread to show, then the color in the bobbin, let me see. I want to make sure I've got this question right. Okay. Kathy was asking, and sorry, Lori also had questions. So the question is, what thread color do I have in the bottom and what thread color do I have in top? So I'll go through that again for you so you can see it. Okay. I'll actually show you again. And then if you don't want the thread to show, then the color thread in the bobbin and clear thread on top. You could do that if you wanted to. That's the way that they recommend doing it, is using a clear monofilament thread on the top. So Jamie, yes, white on the top and I have blue in the bobbin. And I'll change it up so you can see it, so that you can see the difference of it, all right? So the Epic 2 has this stitch programmed in exactly that way. It's in stitch D2. Most of the newer machines that have been released in the last year, 2 years, have that stitch programmed in that way. And you'll know, because if you have an older machine and you use that stitch, it will be in your, it's on your machine, but it's not programmed in the same way. It goes forward and backwards. The newer stitch is programmed in comes only forward. And so that's how you know that it's the newer programming. And these stitches, very good. Marianne asked a question about, can these stitches be done in the hoop? Yes, they can be done in the hoop, but it takes a little while because remember, in embroidery, our tension is very low. And so we need to think about how far up we're going to put that tension so that we can keep the look of it consistent. And I wish I'd programmed it, brought in one of them, because I actually did some circles, applique circles around some, and I did the hand look stitches around them so that you can see the hand look stitch, and it was so much nicer, but it took a little while to get the tension consistent. I had to bring the tension up over 5 to really get it looking good. Okay. And yes, I try to match my glasses to my outfit if I can. I'm usually not that organized though. This was just a pure fluke today. So, all right. So let me go back to the machine, because I think there are a lot of questions of, if I do not have a machine that has this stitch programmed in, how do I know and how do I program it in? So let me come back. I'm going to go back to my machine. All right. Anybody that has an older machine that is, say, 5 years and older, you may have the hand look stitch on your machine. It's just not programmed in the same way. And when you sew it, you'll know it, because the stitch sews backwards and forwards, and then backwards and forwards, and it doesn't have the same nice rich look. That's what I love about our newer machines, is they have changed all the programming for the stitches, and sometimes they've made it a lot easier to get the look that we want it to look like. And so we started programming in these stitches like this a few years ago. So not only can the stitches be done in the hoop, you can also use it to do a Sashiko type of design, right? So let's look at the stitch the way it is. This is the program in stitch that I did. And if I knew I wanted to save it so I could use it again and again, I'm just going to go down to the heart and I can name it, right? There's my new stitch. I can name it and I'm going to call it Sashiko 1. Or I could call it Hand Look 1, right? Let's call it Hand Look 1 because that's what our machines calls it. And then I could change the length of that stitch. Maybe I want to make it longer. I can go back to edit. All right. And I'm going to go back up to the top where I have my stitch length at 5. And I could add, let's add a lot more stitches. And then let's see what that looks like. It's so easy to go in and program in these stitches to get the look that you want. So I would suggest you play around so that you can see what look you want. Okay. So now I'll stitch out the newest one that I just made. And this is the best way to understand how your machine is going to work. Because if you don't test them out, how do you know what the effect's going to be? All right. I still have my tension set at a 7. So the only thing I've done is I've added more stitches. Now, remember, there was a lot of questions about what thread do I have in my top and what thread do I have in my bottom. So let me show you with my camera. Okay. Up here in the top, I have a white sewing thread. It's a polyester thread. It's nice and strong because there is a lot of tension on this thread. It gives me a really nice look. And I don't see any shininess to it like I would with a decorative thread. In the bobbin, I have the turquoise. Remember, I pulled out that turquoise thread? So you don't see the white thread on the top because my fabric is white. It just disappears. When I say it disappears, it doesn't mean it goes away. It means that you don't see it on the white fabric. So it becomes kind of invisible, but it's definitely there. Okay, let's try our new stitch. So look at that. Look at how long that stitch is. Can you see how dramatic that is? And then you still have that one jump stitch, and then it goes back into the blue thread. Well, that turned out pretty well. I think that really, really looks nice. So you can see, even if you have the ability to have the stitch built in, it's still nice to know how to program it, because if you want to make a change to it, you can. So I think our time's getting on here. Let me just check and make sure what questions we have. Okay. So, boy, that turned out really well, didn't it? Look at that stitch, how long it is by programming in a few longer. I mean, it gives you a really nice look. So you can use this in traditional Sashiko patterns. You know, if you've ever seen them, you'll find a lot of them. Sometimes they've got like scallops and they've got a lot of really beautiful designs. Because this can go forward and you don't have to worry about it going back and forth. In the past, we never really could use that for doing those Sashiko patterns. But now, with this stitch developed the way that it is, it works extremely well for doing quilt patterns that have that Sashiko type of look to it. What I would consider is try not to stop and start all the time. Because every time you stop or start, like say you go down an inch and then you stop and then you go down another inch, you're kind of affecting the tension by stopping all the time. So I like to do kind of as long continuous row as possible and not stop and start all the time. It's going to give you a much nicer look. Now, some of the other questions we've gotten are, do you have to use batting? And if you wanted to, oh, that's a really good story. Let me tell you this. So in this case, I did use batting, right? And that helps to kind of make the stitch pop a little bit more on the fabric. In the case of the denim has a very nice thick hand, but I did not put anything in there. There was no lining or nothing in there. And you can see how nice that stitch showed up. Now, in this case, this gives it a different look. But here we had the lime green on top, and I had a navy thread in the bottom. Because I wasn't using batting, I reversed it. I had my bright, colorful thread on top, and then I had the navy color in the bottom. So every time that my machine did the small little stitch, you know, those 5 or 6 tiny, tiny stitches, then it was bringing up the navy thread, and it allowed that top stitch to sit nice. So what you're actually seeing in this case is that long straight stitch, right? The one that's 4.0 or 4.5. That's what's showing here. So it's amazing how you can play with those kind of options to get different looks. There is not really any right or wrong to this. It's all about you playing with the way you look. Here in this pocket, you can see on the navy denim, look at how beautiful that looks. And then on this color denim, because it's got 2 colors to it, it doesn't show up as nice. So you have to wonder, is it worth it if the color is just going to blend into the fabric? On the denim, it probably is. But if I was just doing this on cotton, it probably wouldn't be worth the effort unless I had the high contrast look I wanted. But it's not beautiful on that dark denim. Okay, going around curves is super easy. Absolutely super easy. The way the new stitch is set up, it's not a problem, because what you're doing is, now you noticed I had the laser on my Epic 2. And if you don't have an Epic 2, you can use some options. I like to use the edge of the foot, and I'll line up the edge of the foot with the edge of my fabric so that I get a nice consistent curve going down there. Let me just show you. I think that turned out pretty good. And you can see the way, now this is the stitch the way it's programmed in. I didn't change anything to that at all. But the funny thing about these stitches is, no matter what, if you take a stitch and you stitch it out, and if you don't see enough bobbin thread, you just increase your tension. And it does tell you in your owner's manual, and it does tell you in the machine information that's built up. And you kind of play to what the right place is. If you go so high and it breaks the thread, you've gone too high. So either you need to use a stronger thread or you need to lower the tension. Okay. 7.0 is usually pretty good. But if you start heading up to 8, you might see more bobbin thread, but at that point, the thread might break. So then you know you've gone too far. It hasn't hurt anything, right? And remember, our machines have automatic tension. Automatic tension means you can change the upper thread tension any way you want to. And then when you touch that stitch again, everything gets reset the way that it was. And if you are afraid of, you know, like touching things or adjusting things, I really think it's important for you to realize that automatic tension means not that you should never touch it, but depending upon the technique you're doing, you can make a change to the upper thread tension and it automatically gets reset back the way that it was. Okay. Now, if anybody has any other questions, I'll come back to it later, but I'm going to switch topics a little bit and talk about working with some of our dimensional techniques. And we've got, I just want to make sure I've covered everything here. So I use our directional stitches for doing all kinds of fun things. All right. And I've got a couple of examples. Let me just pull them over here and see if I can get them. Now, one of the things I used it for is, look at this cute little dress. All right. Now, I've made the applique stitches on the bottom, but the back was looking kind of plain. So I'm in an orange theme today, you can tell. So when you look at the back, look at those little pretty little bows there. Now, I sewed them on using my programming. I programmed in some stitches so that it would stop for me to add the ribbon to tie the bow on. And look at how adorable. Doesn't that just add so much fun and character to the back of that jacket, the back of that little dress? Nobody's ever worn this yet, but I've been sitting on it because I didn't really feel it needed something else. And on the back, adding that really just gave it a little bit of nice oomph for it. So we're going to come back over to our machine and we're going to look at what the directional stitches are. And I'm going to show you how you can use them for couching not only yarn and beads and all kinds of different things. And the I'm just answering a couple of the questions here. I see there's another question about the thread. Do I use the polyester for both the top and the bottom? I generally only use the polyester thread for the top because it's much stronger and that's where the tension is. And I use any thread I want to in the bottom. I'll use decorative threads like my rayon threads for embroidery. I can use, because they're a 40 weight, but I would use rayon or polyester embroidery threads. And I could also use cottons and different threads like that. If you go too high a thread in the bottom, one of the questions was about using a heavier thread, like a 28 thread in the bottom. It's so thick that it can't pull through the fabric. That bobbin thread has to come up in 5 short little stitches and pull up the thread. And if it's too thick, it won't pull up. So if you're trying to use some thicker thread, I would use a top stitching needle because that will probably make it easier for thread to come up. But you might find that you're not getting better results when you're using a 28 weight thread. Sometimes a little bit is great and too much is bad. So just be careful about that. And another question we have is the Diamond Royale. The Diamond Royale, you can program this stitch exactly the same way I just did. And all of our machines, the Topazes, the Designer SE, you could go back to the Lilies. They all program in the stitch the same way. So you just add the stitches. The only difference is an extra step in some of the older machines that you have to kind of come to a second screen. But the programming is identical on the Diamond Royale and even the SE and the Designer one. Identical programming to what you just saw there, okay? All right, so let me show you the directional stitches that we're going to look at now. Okay, so we find our directional stitches in menu T. Any machine that has omni-motion stitches is likely going to have that menu T to it because that means it can sew side to side. All right, so if I look at, here, I'll pull these up here. If I look at these stitches here, these are omni-motion stitches. You notice how big and wide they are, right? So most of the machines that have the omni-motion stitches, they all those stitches, the fabric moves side to side. They also have that menu T so that you can get the directional stitches. And there's a million different things you can do with these things. I'm just going to show you a couple of really simple ones. I think you'll be surprised at the kinds of stuff you can do. It's the only way that you can program in the reverse button is using the dimensional stitches. So let's see how that works. Okay. And then I'll show you a few other examples of what I've done with it. Okay. So here we have our menu of directional stitches. These ones are a single stitch. You'll see in the middle, it says single, and down here, it's a double stitch or a triple stitch. It goes forward, back, and forward each time. I'm going to just work with the ones up top. So I'm programming it in. And as you notice here, you'll see the stitch, right? Now, I'm actually not in programming right now. I'm in my main screen. So all I did was set the angle. And now my machine is going to stitch. The fabric is going to move in that direction. What I want to do is program it in. So I'm going to go down to the bottom where programming is. And I'm going to choose the same stitch, menu T, and I'm going to go to the bottom right. And look at what's happening over here. Do you see that? So I have added that number of stitches. I didn't count them, and that's all right. Now I want to go backwards 2 stitches. Remember, this is the only way you can program in a backward stitch. So even if you were programming other stitches and you wanted to go backwards, this is the way you would do it. So I'm going to go backwards twice. And now I'm going to program in a stop. And you'll see how I'm going to use this. So don't worry if you don't understand right now. All right, I've programmed in a stop. Now I'm going to come forward 2 stitches. And I'm going to go back down over to the left, the same amount of stitches. And it doesn't have to be the same amount of stitches. It's just, coincidence that I'm going to do that. And now I'm going to go back 2 stitches. Whoops, that's 3. So I'm just going to delete 1. And I'm going to program in a stop. So when the machine gets to that stop, it's going to stop for me to do something. I'm going to add a ribbon in there, or I'm going to add some yarn, or I'm going to add some beads. So wait for you to see this because it's really cool. All right. So I have basically done a stitch from here to here, and then it'll keep going and repeating that. So I'm just going to touch OK. You'll see here all of the continuous stitch, right? I have a stop programmed in here and a stop programmed in there. So let me get my fabric, and I'm going to change my foot. Usually I should put on the S foot if I'm going to do omni motion stitches, but this time I'm going to put on the B foot, a clear B foot, so you can see. And we'll change my camera over. And let's see if I've got my fabric. Hold on a second. And let me get my fabric here. And some of my yarn and some of my beads and some of my ribbon. All kinds of fun stuff that we're going to be working with right now. So hold on. One moment. I've got to get my ribbon. Where did it go to? Let me see. Sorry about that. My ribbon disappeared. Okay. So I'm going to add this ribbon onto this fabric that I'm just stitching on. Oh no, let's do it over here. You'll see the white thread. All right. So remember what I did. I programmed in a diagonal stitch that's going to go from left to right. I'm going to press the start button. So it did like 10 stitches to the right, and then it sewed backwards 2 stitches and stopped. Now I'm going to add a ribbon. And when I press the start button, it will stitch the ribbon in place, and then it will go over to the right. So every time it stops, I can add a new ribbon. That's how I did these bows, except I didn't do them on a diagonal. I just did them straight down. When you look at the stitch that I did, I have that stop that's in there, and then I programmed in a decorative stitch, and I kind of matched the thread color. And so every time it stopped, I added the ribbon, and then afterwards I just tied it into a bow. So I used the decorative stitch at the same time to do that programming in. Here, I'm going at a diagonal, and every time I stop, I'll add a new ribbon in. Let me just see if I can cut this ribbon. So this time I'm going to add this ribbon in here like this. All right. Now, you'll see this ribbon is much wider. So if I really wanted to do this and I was going to be doing a lot of it, instead of going back the 2 stitches, I might go back 3 stitches. Or I can just kind of like fold the ribbon in half. And now when I go, there, it's ready for another stop. So let me stop for a second. And I'll show you. There's the ribbon. And then all I do is tie it into a bow. And I've got that there, that programmed in there. But I won't do that for now. We're just going to put that aside. All right. So the way that these stitches work, we can also use them to be couching yarn. Okay. And then I'll show you what I made with this one. Okay. I usually will match my thread to whatever my background fabric is. So you see here, I have black fabric. If I didn't want the thread, the stitching to show, because I'm couching down the yarn, then I would match my thread to my fabric. And in this case, I've got some chenille yarn. Okay. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to use the start button. I'm stopping with the needle down so my foot will lift up. Now, when I put the yarn underneath, it's couching the yarn into place. And then I'm just going to pick the yarn up and pull it over, and it hides the stitch. Pull it underneath, press it again. How cool is that? Now, this is just the beginning of the ideas that you can use this for. I'll just do this last one and then I'll stop. So look at how beautiful that is. Now you do see a little bit of the thread color right here, right? But you don't really see the main thread color. It's hidden underneath that stitch. Just like our applique stitches are done like that. So that's why I say if you match your thread color to your fabric, then you would never see that. It would just disappear. But look at how beautiful and even that is. Now, when I did this project, okay, here's a project that I did, and I'll move it back a little bit so you can kind of see a little bit more of it. This yarn, that's how I couch the yarn down. We have a lot of different feet that can couch the yarn down, but I wanted something that was kind of loose. I didn't want it to be all stitched down and flat. And so this is the way that I did that. All right. I made the stitch so it looked like this. And then when I started, I narrowed the stitch down a little bit so it wasn't as wide. And then as I came down below, I made it wider as I went. Let me just check and see if we have any questions about this before we go any farther. All right. All right. So think about how often we go to couch yarns and all different kinds of fabric and threads and everything, right? So this technique would work with a lot of different options. It's not that I use them, and I have a sample around here somewhere. I use them to couch down these little balls because I thought they're adorable, but I don't like the cord that attaches them. So I took the cord off and then I just used them to attach them like that with the stop button in the programming, okay? But look at how fun that is to see all of that yarn couched down and have such a nice loose look to it. Now, another stitch that I used in here, last Christmas, I did a Facebook Live, and you can still find it on our system and or on YouTube, where I used, I don't know if you remember this, where I used the stitches in the K menu to make this Christmas tree. And it is stitch number K65 and K66. So that stitch here looks very heavy because I had a heavy cord in the bottom and I couched it in the specialty bobbin case. But in this case, I wanted just to be able to kind of give it the impression that it was a little bit of seaweed and it didn't have to be too heavy. And so I programmed in the stitch so it gave me that kind of look. I hope that that's kind of getting your juices going to think about how you can do this. So one more thing we're going to couch is beads, because I love working with beads. There's all kinds of fun things you can do, and you can do them the traditional way with the beading foot. Like example here, this is the beading foot. And what I've done, it's actually very, very easy to do. I use the beading foot. Okay. In this case, these beads are smaller. So I used the one that was a 2-3 millimeter. And what happened was I just had the grid that was drawn on so that I knew exactly where I was going to go. And I used a very thin satin stitch. And I just stitched rows and rows of satin stitch going in one direction. And then I went in the opposite direction. And I had beads that were on a cord, a nice strong cord. And I would do the satin stitch, like say, for example, right here. All right. Let me get up here so I can see it very well. Okay. So I would do the satin stitch from here to here. And underneath that satin stitch is the cord where the beads are on. And then I would pull up one bead and then I would keep going with the satin stitch. And then next time I got to the intersection, I would just pull up another bead on the cord. So this worked really, really well, but you don't always want to have that satin stitch there. Sometimes you want to have it so that it's a little bit thicker or heavier, and you can use all different kinds of beads. So I'm going to show you how I did it, okay? And not hard at all. I'm using the same programmed in stitch that I just did. And does anybody want to see me going and reprogramming it back? Because I can go back and reprogram that stitch in. And the way that I made it, it was very consistent, right? Went the same distance left and right. But I don't have to do that. I could go, 10 stitches to the left and 20 to the right and 10, like that's all in what you want to do and what you want it to look like. I'm going to go and program it back. Now that I got your attention, I'm going to program that stitch back, and then I'll show you how we can add the beads and all of that kind of stuff, okay? When I'm sewing the beads on, there is special beading cord that's very thin and very strong. It's like a rock. I mean, you can't break it. But I also often would rather use something decorative. This is like a Wonderfill thread, and it's got a lot of shine to it, but it's extremely strong. You'll be able to see this. It's a Wonderfill cord. and it's used in the couching in our specialty bobbin case. So anything like this, as long as it's strong, would work really well for putting the beads on. And then you also have elastic threads, things like this. These are also meant for beads. So any way you know to do it, you can do it. Oh, and I should show you the beads that are on my bracelet. This was something I made. In this case, I used the beading foot. All right. And these beads were 4 millimeters. So I used the 4 millimeter beading foot. If I was using anything more than that, we don't have an existing 6 millimeter beading foot. So the widest beads you can use with them are 4 millimeters. And it's important you get the right size for the beads because the beads will sit underneath. Now, what I'm doing right now, you can do without a beading foot. You don't need it. And I'm not saying not to buy it. There's lots of good reasons to buy it. But what I'm going to show you right now, you don't need the beading foot. Okay. So let me just switch over my camera. I'll reprogram it in so you can see what it looks like. And then I'll show you how I did it. Okay. So to reprogram in the stitch, I'm going to open up programming. And I'm in the menu T. Normally a menu comes up first. So I'm going to go to menu T. And I guarantee you, a lot of you have had menu T for 20 years and you've never thought about using it or why you would want to use it. Remember, it's the only way you can program in a backward stitch is going into menu T. So I'm going to start by going to the left, to the right. I'm up here and I'm down here. Right? You can make it as long or as wide as you want to. Now, if I'm using a thicker cord, I can go back longer. My stitch length, I can't change. The stitch length is 2.0. So I'm going to go back 2 stitches. Whoops, that's forward. So I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to go backwards. So I'm going to touch up here to go backwards. And if I wanted to go backward 3 times, I could go touch the third one. You'll just see it goes back farther. And now I program in the stop. And this time I'm going to, wait a second, I went up there like that, right? I don't want to do that. I want to come straight down because that's this part where I come straight back down. That's the part that's going to stitch the couch beads, or it's going to couch the yarn or the ribbon or whatever it is I'm using, all right? So remember, this is a couching technique. Now that I'm back down, I have that angle. It's going to come straight back down the other way. All right. So let's do it like this. We won't make them the same width. This time I'm not coming back as far. And then I'm going to go back 2 stitches. So I touch the backwards button or 3 stitches. I'm going to program in the stop. And then I'm going to come down to the beginning of my zigzag again. So I have a zig and I have a zag. And those extra stitches are going to be doing the couching for me. So now I'm going to touch OK. Now, in this case, I'm going to change my camera over so you can see. I want to thank you all for joining me today. I can't tell you how excited I am to have all of you coming in to check and find out more about programming your stitches, especially these Sashiko type of stitches and the directional stitches, because they are just wild the way you can use these. So we're going to go and stitch. I've got my same fabric here. And to start with, you need to have a thread. Okay, so this is the only hand stitching that you'll ever have to do. And I hope I have my needle. My needle should be on here somewhere and it fell off. Look at that. All the best laid plans. Well, that is just disturbing. Now I got to go and find a needle. Okay, so you see the end of this has got a knot in it. And I'm going to pour these beads out. And over here you can see all the different beads that I have. All kinds of different beads. So I need to have a thread that is going to, a needle that's going to go through this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it underneath and have the bead, the needle come up top. And how in the world that needle came off, I don't know. I had it pre-done. So hold on 1 second. Let me get another needle. If I can find it. Well, this is one. Okay. So this needle, you can see how big and wide it is. It's actually too big for the beads to fit through. Some of them will. So what you've got to figure out is what beads do you want to use, and then test to see if the bead, like this one's got a big opening to it, right? So that one's going to go through really easily. You want to find a needle that's going to have a small enough opening that you can thread the cord through, and that also the beads are going to fit into it. So let me just get my beads done. All right. So to start, I'm just going to come up from the bottom, and I knot at the bottom, and I don't have any beads in place. And normally, remember what I said, I'm going to match my thread to my fabric. I don't want to see the thread. I want to see a decorative thread, but I don't want to see the thread that's going to be stitching it down. So all I'm going to do to start is press the start button. All right, now it's time for me to put my beads on. And because I lost my other needle, I'm not sure how many beads I can put on there. Let me see if I can find one. Okay. Now, you see all these lovely beads that I have down here? The needle I had that was the right size, all of these beads would fit on there. I'll show you an example of what I did in a second so you can see. But since I don't have that needle, I'm fudging it. But you can get to see the way this is. You see there's the bead? All I'm going to do is put the cord over here, press the start button, and it couches the cord down. And now I can go in and I can add 5 or 6 more beads. Now, the cord itself doesn't get stitched into place. When I add the beads and then I go, if I have the cord right up against the needle, I don't need to pull the cord here is very loose. Because the cord is loose, I can pull that cord in or out. So if there's any extra fullness to it, then I can pull it in. Let me just come back, and maybe I can cover this again better on another Facebook Live since I lost my needle. But let me come back in here for a second. Okay, so when you're looking at all of these things, all of these different techniques, and I do have some stitched out, just want you to think about the way all of these stitches are. Our applique stitches, they have a programmed in stop to them. So the way that they work is they come, like for the heart, it comes straight down, and then there's a programmed in stop, and we go backwards to applique the stitch in place, and then it comes down and goes to the bottom of the next heart, and there's a programmed in stop. The way that you program in the stop is what allows you to do the next type of thing. So if you wanted to make your own applique stitches, you could make your own applique stitches using the directional stitches, because you can come down, you can go backwards, you can create a diamond, you can go in any direction you want to. Now, I do want to show you that bead thing again, but without having the right needle. Let me just put some things away, see if I can come up with that needle. I'm so sorry. I had that needle and look what happened. Let me see if this one will work better. Is this one the same one that I was just using? I had a whole package of them. Let me see if I can find the needles. You know what? I'll tell you what. Since we're almost out of time, it happens to me all the time. I'm sorry. How about I'll make a little video, and if it's all right with Meredith and Amy, and then we can post it tomorrow. Would that work for everybody? I hope that it will work for you, because that way I can get my right needle, and then I'll just do a little quick one of showing you how to do it, okay? And so everybody tune in sometime in the next day or two, and I'll make a little video for it, and I'll figure out where my needle's gone. Nobody ever said I was the neatest sewer in the world, I'll tell you that. All right, now, so the next Facebook Live is going to be about learning how to add quilt embellishments, and it is October 19th, so don't miss that with Nancy. And then we also have another one. Oh, this is exciting. My Sewnet Facebook Live with Amy and Meredith. So if you haven't had a chance to see them, they're the ones that help me every time I do a Facebook Live. So make sure that you're super nice to them because they can help you in all kinds of ways. Now, and I just wanted to mention this little bowl, the instructions for this, it's the fall season, right? And I love fall seasons. This little technique is about how to do free motion quilting. And if you're not very good at free motion quilting, it really does give you the chance to play around, not worry about stitch length or anything like that. Meredith just linked the instructions so that you can do them if you want to. But I made this as a bowl, but you could also make it as a fall table runner because the leaves are made individually. They're all raw edge, and then you cover up the stitches with a zigzag, and it's a really simple project. So if you're looking for a little bit of challenge and you want to try free motion quilting, give it a try because I think you're going to get hooked. The nice thing about this, it doesn't matter what the stitch length is. You just stitch away and have fun. You do need a free motion foot for it. Thank you again, all of you, for joining me today. And I promise you tomorrow I will get a video going so that you can see how to do the beading. And first, it's going to take me a little while to find the poor needle that I lost. Hopefully, I find it quickly before I step on it. So thank you all. It's been wonderful. And I love that you all come and join me like this. It might be a little while before my next Facebook Live, but I hope to see you soon, one way or another. So bye-bye, everybody.